We had a really good conversation with Katie Skurja.
We did. We had a great conversation with Katie. She's incredibly, well, we say this about everybody, but it's true. She's incredibly brilliant and insightful. Some of the questions that she answered at the end about our identity as opposed to our behavior just blew my mind.
Yeah, she's really knowledgeable. She does a lot of work with inner healing, so she meets with people and she just talks about shame and how shame can be a real impediment to discovering our true self or our true identity. And she talks so this is the first podcast where we cuss apparently on
there's
air.
Some cussing on
and
this.
It's not just one
so we decide if we're going to do it, we're going to do it.
We're going to cuss.
We're going to go all
times.
in.
So she uses POS, right?
Yeah, POS, which is a term that means piece of shit. So now you know. And actually, I think most of our listeners will be just fine.
I'm sure they know what POS means.
We just wanted to acknowledge that. But she also talks about authority, and it was really powerful. She talks about brain science, which we were already like saying our goodbyes, and then we talked for another 10 minutes because it was so good. We just got sidetracked again with brain science and ultimately how all of our behaviors are connected to what we believe about the nature of God, which is just, oh man, I just love that stuff right there. So,
and we talked about paradox.
Good. That was the other thing we needed to mention.
Paradox for me is this idea of holding, at times, not always, but at times holding competing views and being able to see at some level of truth in competing ideas, right? And we see that in our world today with, only this side or only this side. And so that there wasn't a clear definition of paradox. So we just wanted to talk about, from our perspective, what we see as paradox. Yeah.
And she actually speaks on it really well, but we did want to say that two thoughts, I think of it this way, two thoughts that are maybe in tension, but you're able to live in that tension.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And she very much walks us through that.
Much more succinct than what I just said.
Well, I let you say it first so that I could process how I was going to say it. Anyway.
But we had a great time with her.
We did.
This is our second Portland interview. Someone from Portland.
This is our third Portland interview.
Well, in a row. But then, we just need to go over Portland and interview everybody over there.
Yeah, everybody in Portland is awesome. Guys, enjoy this podcast.
Well, Katie, we're super pumped about having you here. I think I told you on the phone, but I heard about your work and what you were doing through, is it the Open Table Talks? And the panels that you did, and so we're excited to have you here.
Yeah, and what we do is just to spend time thinking about who he is and therefore who we are in him, and then we call it rethinking God with tacos. So we will talk tacos. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I love tacos. It's a really great little dive place around the corner in town, and we frequent it a lot.
Oh man, that was what they ate in the garden.
Yeah. Well, that's the crux of my work. I mean, my ministry is called Imago Dei Ministries, after the image of God, and I believe that everything, that's the beginning and the end. It's like you have to start with who are we in the image of God.
Yeah.
And I'm just continuously flabbergasted. And I mean, if I think about it too long, I'd come to tears about it, because it's just so maddening to me that we don't start with that, with the gospel.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Mm-hmm. That is the gospel. That's the good news, that he's good.
Oh my gosh. We start with Genesis 3, that we're a POS,
Yeah.
And instead of creating the image of God, and that's where we start the gospel. And it's almost like we don't even ever connect the dots back to what it means to be created in the image of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What that means.
I wrote a book called Prone to Love. And I know some people have heard this story, but it's based off the song Come Thou Fount, which there's a prominent line in there, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. And the short story is that my grandmother in her 80s, who lived to be 100, was a saint, amazing woman of God. And she went to church, gave to mission. She was, a saint. would go to church 3, 4, 6 times a week whenever there was a service. She was there in her 80s with my cousin, Jonathan, and that song started and she was singing like she always does. And suddenly she got stubborn and she wouldn't participate. And it was so disturbing that my cousin leaned over to her and said, Grandma, what's wrong? And she said, I'm not prone to wander, Jonathan. I love him. And it was a phenomenal shift for me. The biggest moment in my life was the discovery of my Father's affection for me, revealed through Jesus. The fact that I am worth the blood of Jesus. I remember I had a hard time saying that phrase and wrestling with that phrase, and then realizing that my feelings have been determining for so very long how I've lived, first based off of who he is, but then also based off of who I am. So what I believe about him determines what I believe about myself, and my feelings become the thing that proves it. And suddenly I'm singing Prone to Wander, Lord, I feel it, as though that's the gospel truth, and it's nothing that Jesus came to reveal to us. Yeah. I know you can speak to that very deeply, and maybe that's a place to start.
I absolutely agree that what we think about God says everything about us, because again, if our truest identity is that image of God, and I use this diamond as the metaphor of that image of God within us. We all have it. And again, not only among believers do we start the story with that, but then we don't start the evangelism with that. Like, it's already in you. We don't have to get this in you.
Wow.
And I before I understood that, I felt guilty because I didn't evangelize. I didn't share the gospel, but it just didn't make sense to me.
Right.
I accepted it, but it didn't make sense. I mean, I just felt guilty all the time. Yeah. And because I couldn't share that story. And I didn't know why I couldn't share the story. I just felt like I was a bad Christian. Right. And then I understood the idea of the Imago Dei and everybody. It's like, I could talk to anybody on an airplane or wherever. It's like, I see the diamond. And people who aren't offended by that, like, they're offended if you start the idea of, I have something that you don't have and I need to get it in you to earn a notch on my belt.
That's evangelism 101, what I grew up with.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. See, I didn't grow up with that because I grew up Catholic. And so I came into that understanding. And like I said, I accepted it, but it just didn't jive with me. And because I had an experience of God, and it didn't match that. And so I didn't know how to make sense of it. And so I didn't grow up with the POS theology per se. It wasn't penal substitution, but it still was, it wasn't with the Imago Dei idea. Like, I heard that concept, but that wasn't the starting and ending point.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
You've talked about the idea of the triune God, what we see in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that relationship being really key. When we talk about being created in the image of God, and when we look at the Trinity, can you expand on that? What you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, Genesis, let us, so the us is Elohim, let us create God in our image. So right off the bat, we have a hint of the triune God. It's monotheistic, but it's a 3-in-1 right from the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
And so then Christ comes to reveal who is God, because from the time of the fall, it's like they're confused. Genesis 3 to Christ coming, it's like a story of confusion. Who is God? And trying to appease this angry God. And, as I was talking to Jason on the phone, I teach this idea of the drama triangle, that I believe that started right there at the Genesis 3, when it's like this relationship got turned on its head, and the drama triangle is this upside down relationship.
Yes.
Now, identified in the counseling realm, it wasn't tied back to the Trinity, but I see it that way. Like, the Trinity is this right side up triangle, and the drama triangle is this upside down. Yeah. And so from Genesis 3 to Christ comes, and it says he is the exact image of the unseen God. Okay, so when we look at Christ, we see God. Yeah. And who is God? God is triune. So what is true about the triune God is true about Christ. And what's true about Christ then is true about me.
Amen.
Because I'm in that image of that. And so, like, just this morning, I'm teaching a class for people recovering from spiritual abuse, taught about POS theology, and then one of the gals responded in an online chat this morning, and she said, okay, you're telling me about this life outside of drama, but does that mean that I have to, like, it's going to be bland, and it's going to be like no emotion and no spice? There's no, outside of this drama, which I mean, she tends to be prone towards this, right? But
Right.
most believers that I know have never tasted and seen what life is outside of drama.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because we basically baptize the drama. And I responded to her and I said, the easiest way you can answer any question about, who am I outside of drama, is always to point back to Christ. If it's true about Christ, it's true about me. If
That's
it's not true about Christ, it's not true about me.
That's it.
And so let's put your question to the test. Does life outside mean no emotion? Well, nope. Christ has emotion. Does it mean that I can't be frustrated at injustice? Absolutely not. Does it mean life is bland? Absolutely not. I mean, Christ is the most complex, synergistic, human being that you can imagine. Interesting. I mean, we don't present it that way because we have to tame him down. When we don't start with with the fullness of God, we tame him down to be some mamby-pamby, bland and interesting person who, but that's not who Christ is. I'll use words like subversive with Christ, and evangelicals are like, what? Subversive? Touching the lepers, letting the woman at the well, like he is the prototype of subversive.
Wow.
We've talked about this before on this podcast, but I think the lie and the myth of separation is such a, when we have to divorce our humanity from, who he is, I think that leads to all kinds of problems because, you have people quote, verses like Isaiah, where it says, his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And so anything that becomes human, we actually see it as a negative thing. And so what you're talking about there is that what we see in him, we also see in us, making our humanity actually part of what it means to be with him, right? To have a relationship with him.
To accept our humanity is to have relationship with him.
Yeah. That's good.
Right. It's like we make the gospel about denying our humanity, and that's the exact opposite direction we need to go. I believe that when you look at the story in the garden, that it was in denying their humanity and wanting to be like God. So the flip side of wanting to be like God is denying that they're created in the image of God.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That takes them outside of the garden because inside the presence of God, there's only room for one God.
Yeah.
So when you want to be God, that takes you outside of right relationship.
Yeah, that's
and
so
that
good.
the antidote is to accept our humanity as Christ did. So Christ came, the healing of the sin was the sin of denying our humanity.
That's so good.
Right. And so the antidote is accepting our humanity. That allows my thoughts to be aligned with God's thoughts who are higher than mine.
Yeah, right.
And isn't it fascinating that in that moment, in the denying of our humanity, is when shame entered the narrative?
Well, actually, I would say that it was the shame that led to the denying of the humanity.
Okay.
I believe that the shame came before even the sin because the seed of doubt, like, maybe it's not good enough to be created in the image of God.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to be. Maybe I'm not enough to be created in the image of God.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to be something greater. And so therefore, then in denying the denying of humanity is the sin.
And really what that led to is what Thomas just talked about. The thing that we've wrestled with ever since is this idea of separation, which was never on his end. It was always on our end. God goes searching for them in the garden, and they're the ones that are hiding from him. And yet they project that. And I would suggest that religion has projected the separation on his end ever since. And Jesus comes and he reveals that's not at all what's taking place. I'm going to take that lie to its conclusion.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that it's a sneaky way to still deny our humanity and pretend that we're following God.
Right.
Right. It's because we still live under that propensity to want to judge good and evil. And so we make these systems that allow us to still do that and judge, we're better than the others, all in the name of God. To me, that is taking God's name in vain. That is taking God's name in vain. When we do that in God's name and say, this is who God is.
We jumped into the deep end right away, but I want to ask you this because you pulled that diamond out and we'd start to talk about our worth, our value, who we really truly are. I know you use this diamond, and I know you do this thing with children between the ages of 4 and 14, and it's
not older than 10.
Not older than 10. Okay. And it's about the peanut M&Ms. That's the one I'm talking about. Is that the one?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just set it up, and then you can kind of walk us through this. And so you have kids, and you show them a peanut, if I recall.
Peanut
and
M&M.
A peanut M&M, right? Better, even better, of course. A peanut M&M, and you ask them name at least one way that people are like the peanut M&M. And then I want to read a couple of my favorite responses. They are good. One of the kids said they're good. They're sweet chocolate. And she says, I'm sweet, which I loved. And she says, lots of people are sweet. I just love that one. Then there was, I think, a young fellow that said, on the inside, God sees a good heart, where on the outside, maybe some people might think they're ugly. I think, man, that's deep stuff right there. And then it was after that, he said, I am a peanut to God.
That little guy, he was 4 years old.
He gets it, though. Can you speak to what you're doing and what you're learning and what you're revealing through this process?
Yeah, I mean, so when I first started to understand this idea of the Imago Dei and shame, and that I was searching for a metaphor. My mind thinks in metaphors, and I think, Jesus talks about metaphors all the time, and to understand spiritual things. And so I tried on a lot of different ways to show these three different aspects of ourselves: the diamond that's always there, the Imago Dei, our shame and what coats it, and then this false self that we present. And it just, I don't know, it came to me one time of this idea of the peanut M&M, and that the candy coating, what we present to the world, and we want to be loved and shiny and all this stuff. And people say, well, hey, I wish the chocolate wasn't the bad stuff. It's like, when I talk to kids, I call it poo, and when I talk to adults, I say, crap or shit, and
right.
Just to offend religious spirits. But it just works, and kids get it. As I came to understand the diamond more, the peanut is the diamond.
Sure.
A diamond is very fractal. It's very, it's got all these aspects to it that can refract light and stuff, and that's true of Christ, is that it's very paradoxical. I mean, the book I wrote is called Paradox Lost, because we've lost the paradox of who Christ is. And in the traditional understanding, as I started to understand paradox, one of the premier people who've written about spiritual formation or spiritual levels and development was James Fowler, back in, I think, the 50s. It was quite a long time ago. But he believed that people didn't understand paradox until they were in their 40s. And I just was like, absolutely, I don't believe that, because that means that we are doomed to repeat our shame.
Right.
Because if you can't get paradox until you're in your 40s, then we have already raised our kids under a false paradox, or a lost paradox, right?
Yeah.
And so as I started to explore this, I started to ask kids. I mean, years and years ago, I would give them a pack of M&Ms and say, how are you like this? And they could tell me. And I was telling this one time, just about a year or so ago, to the guy who produced it, Doug Crane. And he said, well, I want to do this for you. I want to create this film. So we gathered a bunch of kids. I'd never, most of them I'd met. And I walked in cold. They had not had these conversations. And
right.
I am confident that these kids are going to give me good answers, because I believe in our Imago Dei, we understand paradox. I believe the reason why we don't live in it is because when we teach a theology that's lacking paradox, it creates and adds to the layers of shame and candy coating. And the reason why most people don't get it until they're in their 40s is because that's when it breaks down. That's when we have a midlife crisis. That's when we reject God altogether, or we go, if there's a God, I'm going to find this.
Yeah.
We press past the shame, and we find it by happenstance, instead of teaching it paradoxically. Right. And so the very fact of the peanut M&M, it's paradoxical in the sense that, there's this great goodness in me, and yet the shame can also drive me to do great badness.
Yeah.
Like I believe that all of our badness, all of our brokenness, it comes out of that shame is so powerful. It can drive us to do insanity things. I mean, anything you read in the papers and the news, that's driven by shame. Because people won't do that from their Imago Dei. They won't. We won't hurt another person if we're seeing the diamond in ourselves and then seeing it in the other person.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
What I loved was there were no kids that gave an answer that was, oh, I'm evil, or I'm, You know, every one of them was convinced that heart, that the very part of who they are, was uniquely special and good.
Yeah.
And then when you asked them about how God felt about them and whether he could see past it, it was really simple for them to articulate, where, like you said, when we get to 40, there's so much shame, so many things we've done to protect ourselves, that we can't even really see the simple truth of our value.
Absolutely.
It was one of the hardest things for me to say at the age of 30 when I heard somebody preach, "I'm so worth the blood of Jesus." I was offended by the statement. I thought, and yet intellectually I knew it was true, because he doesn't die for junk. So in my mind, I'm like, well, I guess I am worth them. But why am I having such a hard time saying this out loud to people? I feel like as soon as I say it out loud, I have to go, but I'm also a piece of shit, obviously. And that's the thing. I would love you to speak to shame. Like, what is that? And where does it come from? And can you break that down for us?
Well, I believe that shame is rooted in judgment. So when we agree with a judgment that's not an agreement with God, that it causes this force, I think of it as like a spiritual force. It's like so powerful. I talk about shame as like the most powerful force on the planet, apart from grace. Like, grace is the only thing that can overpower shame. That's how. And so that's why I can look at the news and go, I get why these people, I mean, as crazy as some of the behavior is, that's how powerful shame is, because it can drive us to do the most insane things.
Right.
But when our theology then again promotes this idea of a false identity, like a POS, it's no wonder, and then when we can't live up to it in God, then a lot of people just chuck it, and then they live into their shame.
Right.
They live into a false identity, like, wholeheartedly. Right. So shame is a force that it's like a stickiness that coats us. I mean, when you talk with people who are in shame, you can feel it's like palpable on them, and you can even feel, when you start to pay attention to it, you can feel the difference between, for example, shame tears or grief tears or joy tears. It's like there's a substance to it. It's not just, I do work with people in inner healing, where bringing them into an encounter of God and bringing their shame into the presence. And it's like, again and again and again, I mean, over 20 years, people see it like this icky substance that leaves them, like it's toxic, that leaves them.
Wow.
It's amazing. And yet, again, our theology promotes that when we start with a POS theology.
Yeah, we talked about shame in our when we were talking before, but specifically when you were talking about paradox and how we can deal with paradox. You've done work with Richard Rohr, and I'm sure you've read Falling Upward and his work on the first and the second half of life. That book for me was a game changer. Because it provided language for what I was experiencing as I was reflecting on my spiritual journey. And in the work that you've done with inner healing, have you picked up on some of those same themes, that there comes a point when people are so desperate for something that's different than maybe what they were handed down,
Reading Falling Upward for me was just another way. He puts it in different language, but it was the same thing that I was teaching in terms of the peanut M&M idea, in the sense that it's like what I was saying, where James Fowler said we don't get paradox until our 40s. I believe the reason that is because our candy coating has a shelf life. It will break down. Like, it will eventually stop working. And so people either get desperate enough, like you said, in the second half of life, or you reinvent yourself and spackle the cracks, and then you don't enter into the second half of life. Because people can be 65 years old and they could still be well, entrenched in the first half of life, like early on. I mean, I've had 65-year-old men in my office who, if I closed my eyes, sounded like a 15-year-old.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Right.
And it's so far from the second half of life. And as Rohr talks about, oftentimes that's because they have enough resources, financial or otherwise, to protect their candy coating so that it's not breaking down.
My goodness.
Right. And this man that I'm referring to, he was a son of a multinational corporation. He never had to work.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, this gal that brought him in, he only was in my office because his girlfriend brought him in and couldn't, wanted me to fix him. And after the meeting, I said, I can't fix him. He's so far from being his candy coating broken. There's nothing I could do. I don't have a sledgehammer big enough to knock that across in that thing.
Well, I think it has everything to do with how we deal with pain, because if we don't deal with pain, we'll essentially transmit it. And so what happens after that is that we essentially externalize all of these unhealthy coping mechanisms, and we call that our identity, when in reality that's our false self and not our true identity, who we were created to be, right? Genesis 1. And I think, especially in our culture, I think men don't actually know how to deal with pain. And so then they just externalize that onto everybody. So I think that's part of what happens too.
Well, and that's why Rohr talks about, when he talks about the first and second half of life, that you can see an 11-year-old in the second half of life. And that's oftentimes because they had cancer or something like that, some kind of tragedy, that they got in touch with their mortality.
Yes.
Right? So the very thing that we have to accept in order to get back to our Imago Dei, you encounter when you have a near-death experience. You come to terms with the fact that I'm immortal. Just the verse, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. I think of that as like, eventually you will see that you're a human. Right? Sometime or another, you're going to see that you're human. For some people, it's going to be on the other side of the veil, like the 65 people who are still stuck in this, the first half.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
But you will eventually bow and go, no, I'm not God.
Yes.
And you will come to terms with the fact that you are a human. Like, mortality is the great equalizer.
In our circles, the name Jason Upton is pretty popular. He's a worship leader, but he's super smart. Anyways, I love him. But he talks about how with kids, they do for human discovery, and with adults, they do it for human approval oftentimes. The reason that he was thinking about this is because his when he had young children, he couldn't understand how their kids could just yell for just amounts, like hours and hours and hours. So he went to a specialist in Milwaukee. He was like, I can't do that. What is going on? And the specialist said they're literally discovering what their capabilities are. So they're doing things out of a place of human discovery and human, like, just searching for things. Yeah. But then as they get older, the human discovery becomes, what do I need to do in this situation? Is it appropriate for me to do this? Right. And so that distinction between human discovery and human approval and inner healing, I think, is really, really key.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, as young as 2 or 3 years old, kids can start making judgments of this isn't okay, and they start, molding themselves into where they fit within that system. And because we tend to present in this black and white kind of way, a non-paradoxical way, and our own human brains, have a proclivity towards that, then it's like, well, if I can't be this, then I have to be that. Like one of the metaphors that I use to talk about Christ, a paradoxical metaphors is like lion and lamb. And lion and lamb hold a lot of different attributes of Christ. Like we can talk about strength and weakness, submitting and unyielding, lots and lots of different types of paradoxes can be held within those metaphors.
Right.
And I believe that in the diamond, we are all both of those. We are lion and lamb.
Yeah.
But, in the family system, they can start to get reinforced to be one or the other. And so basically that then becomes the layers of our candy coating. We present with the lion and hide the lamb, and that becomes our shame. We're ashamed of weakness. We're ashamed of vulnerability. We're ashamed of the things that represents, emotions or whatever. And then the flip side could be true, where we wear the lamb on the outside, but the lion is hidden. And that's not true along those even though we present in the church as if men are supposed to be lions and women are supposed to be lambs. That's not the truth. And it doesn't fall along those lines.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I have, almost as many lamb men come through my door as I do,
Wow.
lion men. It's probably about a 60-40, but it's really close,
Wow.
And sometimes it might seem like more than that because lion men are less likely to walk through the door, right? So it can seem like it's at least 50-50, but in the world, it's probably about 60-40.
Yeah. It's amazing that, and if we're talking theologically, the shame causes you to hide.
Mm-hmm.
And you made the statement, and I love this. I'm going to ask you about it. You made the statement that the only thing more powerful than shame is grace. I've seen that. I remember a conversation I had several years ago. I was a family pastor for years, which means I get paid a whole lot less to tell people I'm not a counselor. And then eventually send them to a counselor. But I do triage. And so I would meet often with a lot of different couples that were in relational situations that were hard. And often that's the thing that actually makes that fellow want to talk. But I remember having a conversation with one fella, and he started by telling me he'd had an affair, and he started by telling me how broken he was and how evil he was. And he began to use scripture, and he began to use all kinds of, he certainly had the evidence, if you're prone to wonder and then you feel it, he was certainly feeling it. And I remember I asked him to stop, and I said, could you take a moment, hold on. I want you to just stop for a second and ask God what he actually thinks about you. And he started to go down that road again. I'm a sinner. I'm evil. I'm broken. So I shifted, and I think this is what you would define as grace. This is certainly how I would define it. Grace is the empowering revelation of how he actually sees you. So I began to speak to him how the Father saw him, and every time we would meet, I would ask him to do that. Because he always wanted to start with, I'm a piece of shit, and he would base it off of the fact that he'd done some shitty things. And every time we would talk, I would say, well, that's not how the Father sees you. How does the Father see you? And over time, he began to change. He began to be transformed. And to me, that's what grace is. But I would love for you to speak to that. I know you have lots of experiences in that, and then explain maybe how grace operates, what it means, and how it works in our lives.
Well, just as shame is a force, I think grace is also a force. It's a presence. It's there's a felt presence of shame. You can feel it when you walk into a room,
right?
On people, and there's a felt presence of grace. And so given the example you were talking about, because shame is such a powerful force, I have a saying that you don't try to talk someone out of their shame.
Yeah.
Because shame is rooted, I believe, in the limbic brain, and the limbic brain is a non-verbal part of the brain. And so you can't talk someone out of it. Like it's almost impervious to words. So I use this thing, I call it a paradox prayer, but basically it's the Job prayer, though you slay me, yet I will trust you.
Yeah.
Though, it's Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I fear no evil.
Yeah.
I believe that's a model for facing our fears, and you can see it in a lot of different places. That's just two examples in scripture. But it's taking your worst fear of your limbic brain and forcing it to connect with your prefrontal cortex, which in shame, those two things aren't connecting. Right? Like my prefrontal cortex knows that I'm loved and accepted by God, but my limbic brain doesn't know that. Well, as small as the limbic brain is, it can overpower the prefrontal cortex.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's a game changer. It's like, well, you can talk till you're blue in the face. And I believe that there's a thing called the backfire effect, and that it says that when something's an emotionally held belief, that it actually gets stronger when you try to talk the person out of it.
Sure.
So I work really hard to never try to talk someone out of their shame.
Yeah.
I help them identify the shame, i.e. piece of shit, and then we put it into a paradox prayer. And it goes like this. Even though I'm a piece of shit, I'm loved and accepted by God. Even though I'm a piece of shit, I love and accept myself. So it's declaring even if the worst possible thing is true about me that I can think of, I'm still loved and accepted by God. And in the I love and accept myself, I'm giving up my right to judge myself i.e. I'm not playing God anymore. Right? Now I can turn towards in the presence of God, there's only room for one God. So when I give up my right to judge, now I can actually step into the presence of God. And now I can have a felt sense, a taste and see that the Lord is good.
I also think in that moment, what we realize is that even though we're saying the word shit a lot, even though I did a shitty thing, that's not actually who I am. Right. And that's where Brene Brown's work is really important, because the distinction between guilt and shame, who I am at my core, is not the mistake or the thing that I did in that moment.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think.
Right. But when the shame is really high, like I often do this like shame scale test, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how high is that for you? And if it's 10 or higher, then if it's 5 or lower, then the drawbridge is low enough that you might be able to have a conversation like you were talking about. But if it's 10 or higher, it's not gonna pierce that, that very well.
That's good. Yeah.
So there was this one time, this woman, I asked her word was failure. And I asked her on a scale of 1 to 10, how high is the shame for you? And she said 10,000. It's off the charts.
Wow.
And I talked to her about this idea of the paradox prayer. And she goes, Katie, I can't do that because I don't believe that God can accept me if I'm a failure.
Sure.
And I certainly don't love and accept myself if I'm a failure.
Yeah.
And I said to her, it doesn't matter whether you believe it. Think of it like a neurological exercise. You're forcing your prefrontal cortex and your limbic brain to connect so that the limbic brain doesn't get to control you.
That's really good.
She did the paradox prayers like this. It was so funny. I still crack up when I think about it. She goes, even though I'm a failure, I'm loved and accepted by God. Bullshit. Even though I'm a failure, I'm loved and accepted. I'll love and accept myself. Bullshit. She had about 3 rounds. And I checked in with her, and the shame scale, it was down to 10. It went from 10,000 to 10 in 3 rounds of that. And then we did some more, and she didn't need to say bullshit. She was able to just say it. Yeah. And then she was able to turn towards the Lord. It says, turn towards me and the veils will be removed. Yeah. Right. But when we're judging ourselves, we've turned away from the veils. And that's when we feel like we're in, in separation, because we're operating in separation. It doesn't mean that God is not with us. And so now I can step through the veil, and then it's a game changer. It's like, this is a different way of being. Yeah. It's like you step from, like we were talking about earlier, you step from out in the desert heat of Phoenix and you step into a cool room. It's like, it's palpably different.
Yeah.
Different place of being.
That's good. I want to throw a theological thought at you, because what I'm hearing you say, and what I so love, and this is the Heavenly Father that I know, is that and I think Baxter says it this way: He'll step inside our delusion, and He'll blow it up from the inside out. I love that thinking, the way that's what Jesus did. He'll step into our language, He'll step into our understanding, and if our language is at second grade level, He speaks second grade level, and he speaks it fluently. So this is my theological thought, and it's something that I look at the Garden of Eden and I say, God created us, and He said it was really good. And so let me ask you this. I'm going out on a limb now. Do it. So when He created us, He didn't create us. He created us with an identity that was good, made in His image and likeness. At the fall, shame entered this narrative and began to tell us that we were our behavior. And we begin to identify by our behavior. And yet our behavior isn't how He sees us. He sees us in Christ. Christ came and redeemed and restored us back to that original pre-shame condition. We have access to that. What I hear you saying is, when you're meeting with someone who's got a 10,000 level shame level, this is the prayer that's going to get them to 10. But the other side of that question and this is where I've always wondered about this. And my wife and I discuss this all the time. I'm nervous because I'm going to ask you a question that might be outside of tradition. We have AA. And when you go to AA, it starts with, hi, my name is, and I am an alcoholic. And we associate, to me, an identity word with a former behavior. But we also know that there's great freedom in that honesty. Where I'm coming from is that at some point, the full freedom of God is that, hey, my name's Jason, and I'm not an alcoholic. or my name is so-and-so, and I'm actually free from that. It doesn't mean that you'd ever go drink again. But to me, there's that next step of, we actually, in the garden before the fall, we weren't alcoholics. We weren't created that way. And so therefore that behavior doesn't ultimately define our identity in Christ. How do you navigate that? Because you're in the position where you want to get them from point A to point B, point B to point C.
Right.
Good question.
Well, I think underlying that question is this student friend of mine, we've had this conversation a lot of times, and we've gone round and round about it. And where I stand on that is, I don't believe that every I am statement is an identity statement.
Okay.
It can be an identity statement, or it doesn't have to be.
That's
right.
Good.
So, for example, I'll use my own. I'm one of 10 kids, 5 sisters of the 11, and of the 5 sisters, I'm the only redhead. So when I was a kid, I hated my red hair. That was being a ginger back then. There wasn't even a term. It was carrot top, and I hated my red hair. So I am a redhead was a shame statement for me. It was a shame identity statement.
I got you.
Right? And so if you wanted to tease me, which my 6 brothers did, and other people, carrot top, then that was a shame statement.
Yeah.
I can say I'm a redhead now, and it's not a shame statement. It's not an identity statement.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. So it can change. And so I agree with you that I'm an alcoholic can be an identity statement that keeps me stuck in a cycle of sin and shame, of drama.
Yeah.
Or it can be a non-identity statement, and I distinguish it between a little I am and a big I am.
There you go.
The big I am is not an alcoholic. The big I am isn't even a redhead,
Right.
It's not about that. It's not the things that we take our identity in apart from Christ make them into idols, and they can be false idols. All of them are false, but they can be shame idols. Like I'm a POS is an identity statement.
Right.
Right. And so I agree. And it doesn't, I know people who are devout 12-steppers of different ways that don't take their identity in that, who know who they are in Christ, and ones who do, and it becomes their identity as that. And I think then have less freedom because of that.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
What a good answer. Good gracious. That was good.
Yeah.
I think the 12 steps are beautiful, and they're rooted in good theology. It's just that it can be, they can be promoted in a way that you take your identity in that.
And many Christians, so growing up in the faith, I am a sinner, I am evil, I am prone to wander, and then my feelings prove it. And they were all identity statements, and they were all false humility. And suddenly I'm spending my days trapped in my own narcissistic brokenness, really, because it's this constant repetitive, all I'm trying to do is spend my day not sinning. And It's not even possible, because that's actually in my nature. And so that's the thing that maybe theologically that I'm always pushing against is that's not actually how the Father sees you.
Well, but it goes back to what you were saying about that we aren't our behavior. It's this terrible trap that if we make the sin about behavior, then it keeps us in the cycle of drama, because now we're trying to control our behavior. But the thing is, in the Imago Dei, in the diamond, when I accept my humanity and I'm aligned with Christ, then the way of my being isn't going to be of the behavior of sin.
That's good. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? It's like I use this metaphor of, I told you I like metaphors. I use this metaphor like of a surface level, not a one that you put up against the wall, but one you would put on a table where it's got like concentric circles, and it's got the bubble that's in the center when it's lined up. To me, that is when I'm level and I'm centered, I'm the bubble, and I'm centered in the middle of Christ, then the way of my being is lined up with the truth of my being, is the way Baxter puts it. And that metaphor to me is an image of that statement of so when I heard him say that, I sent him a surface level, and I said, here's a metaphor for that statement. Because when I'm level, then I won't have the sinful behavior. But when I get tilted, when I get thrown off center, that's when the behavior happens.
Wow.
So if I'm taught to deny my humanity, then I live tilted, and now now I have to try to stop the behavior that I'm prone to do.
Wow. I love that.
And judge the other person's tilting is worse than mine. Right?
Yeah.
The way you tilt in the wind is worse than the way I tilt in the wind.
Right.
But and even in what I heard in your answer there, Katie, is that when Jason was talking about identity, is this thing called nuance, right? Which we're all familiar with. And I think one of the things that I see in our world, and we can see this with what's happening in 2020,
Absolutely.
is that it's either or. It's not both
Right.
and. Like very few people can see, yeah, I can see this side, and I can also see that there is something that's happening here. And I see what you're talking about there, I think, is the role of nuance in the life of spirituality, which I think is incredibly important to be able to say, I acknowledge that at one point in my life, this type of thinking was helpful for where I was at in my journey. But now, as I've tried to grow, it's not helpful anymore. And this is helpful.
And
but
I can leave it.
Yeah. But but also if that's where you're at in your journey, that's cool too. Because I'm not your God. It's not my job to actually form you to think every single thought that I have. I think the nuance in that, I think, is really, really important.
You can liken it to a developmental model of understanding children. So like, there's expectation that children are going to go through certain developmental stages, both physically and mentally. Like if you look at Piaget's stages and, a kid that can understand conservation or can understand conservation, but, a child learns how to stomach crawl and then army crawl, and then they can, walk and then run. And the same is true. We can understand a spiritual development. And I would say that on the low end of spiritual development, and it's hard to use words because they tend to get, loaded, but on the early stages of spiritual development, then we don't understand paradox. We don't understand nuance, but we can one of the hallmarks of a deeper, higher, broader, however you want to describe it, spirituality is that it can understand nuance and paradox. It can hold paradox. So to encounter somebody who's not able to hold nuance or paradox and who's very black and white in their thinking, all or nothing, it's like dealing with a child who hasn't learned how to crawl yet. Right?
Wow.
Hasn't learned how to walk yet, or they're, it's, and so I don't look at that child and go, that's a bad child. I say, they haven't learned how to crawl yet. Now, if that child is 13 and they're still, not doing that, you're going to think there's something really wrong there.
Sure.
For spirituality, we have such immature spiritualities.
Yes.
And the phrase that I had to handle that paradox for so long, it's been a good phrase for us, is I don't know, but he's good. It's the ability to, you mentioned Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Your rod and your staff or they guide me, you comfort me, you prepare a table. And then he does it. He says, I'm following you, you're good, you. And then he says, even though I walk into the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Mm-hmm. And it's a paradox right there. He's like, I'm following you, and now I'm in the valley. I'm giving you no credit for the valley. Mm-hmm. And here we are in a valley that very much exists. And in this valley now I have access to intimacy. You prepare, now it gets intimate with that word you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Mm-hmm. And then his life thesis, surely goodness and love will follow me. Mm-hmm. And yet we have, I think, that ability to live in the tension of I don't know, but he's good, or I don't understand, but that's okay, is really, really important in our leadership. And yet, I'm getting to, I got a question for you. Hopefully it'll be right up your alley. But it's really important in our leadership because I think we do have a lot of people that can't handle paradox that is in our leadership that gives no room for nuance. I'm trying to get to, I know you speak on authority, so I'm trying to find a way to introduce that concept because I really want you to talk about what authority actually is and what healthy authority is, not just in the church, but I think that, boy, it'd be really helpful if we had somebody speaking to that right now, especially today.
Yeah. I mean, authority is near and dear to my heart because it points back to the diamond. I mean, I do this exercise with people when I'm teaching in groups when we talk about authority of like, let's take the paraphrase of Romans 12. All authority comes from God, submit to all authority. And then I ask people like, what words come to mind with the word authority? And the words that people always throw out are like boss, leader, power, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then I take the word authority out of that sentence and I said, let's put those words in there. And not a single one do people feel comfortable with. Submit to all leaders come to God, submit to all leaders. And people are like bristling. All power comes from God, submit to all power. No, all bosses. And we go through every word every time.
Control was one of the words.
Control. Yeah. Nope. Can't, those don't. It's like, okay, well, what word works? The only word that's ever worked that people kind of like breathe a sigh of relief and can go, yeah, I could do that. That works for me. And it's not just because they don't want to submit to authorities, because in their hearts, they know that can't be true because that's a Hitler. That's a, right. I can't submit to a Hitler. I can't submit to, whether it's on a national level or a family level, we don't want that. The word that works is truth. All truth comes from God, submit to all truth. Well, who is the author of truth? Is Christ. So it's the Christ in me. And so I start with, we have to understand authority from Christ in me. And I call that our intrinsic authority. Everybody has intrinsic authority because everybody has a diamond inside them, which is Christ in them.
I love that.
So that's what levels the playing field. Now, overlaying on that, there's other types of authority that all can be used outside of my intrinsic authority. So, for example, if I use my position of authority not in line with my intrinsic authority, now I'm going to lord it over. Now I'm going to control or manipulate or stuff like that. So position is one of the types of authority. Relational, like you talk about, relational authority comes from acknowledging and recognizing and honoring the intrinsic authority in another person. Right? Wow. If I don't I don't have relational authority. That's so good. You gain relational authority and people don't even have to know what the Imago Dei is.
Right. Wow.
Right. Just because,
I love that.
I mean, I have people tell me, and to me, it's one of the biggest compliments. Like you see me like on the same level, or you treat me and it's like, absolutely, because that's who we are before God, is that we are eye to eye, so that's relational authority. And I believe that happens between Pope and child, between pastor and, every level of humanity. You can honor the intrinsic authority in another person.
I love that.
Wisdom authority is just the person that you look to for wisdom. You don't even have to have a relationship with them, like a Richard Rohr or
That's good.
People who are maybe dead and gone, John of the Cross, or whoever, G.K. Chesterton, the people that you look to that have wisdom. Then there's competence authority, which again, you don't have to have a relationship with. Right. The plumber that comes to my door, I want them to have competence authority.
Right. The doctor that works.
And I'm going to treat that person with intrinsic authority. So I'm going to treat them with respect, but I don't need to have a relationship with them. I just want them to be able to fix my plumbing, And
that authority would be specific to the area of their expertise.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, I love that.
So there are people who have like all 5 types of authority in my life. And there's people who every person I meet should have the intrinsic authority.
Right. I love that.
That I honor in them.
Yeah.
One of the things that I notice with authority is, and maybe that's because of my charismatic or Pentecostal upbringing, but there's 2 ends of it, right? One end is authority cannot be questioned at any cost because it's God-given. And
as a person?
Yes.
Right? Which that's a setup for abuse, right?
Right.
Yes,
Exactly. And I cannot, no matter what, I cannot see a flaw because it's a God-given authority. Mm-hmm. But then I also see the other end of it, which is no one's going to tell me what to do no matter the cost, right? And when I have people come in my office, I see both ends of those spectrums, and I try to get to a place where there's a good ground there, where there's a good middle ground where you can have respect for people even if you don't disagree with them. But it's like you said, it's a recipe for disaster
Oh,
if you can't see anybody's flaws, because
absolute.
yeah.
And if you don't start with the idea of intrinsic authority, every single type of authority is going to be abused outside of that.
Correct.
Every single type of authority will be abused. And one of the things that I talk about when, in the context of authority is that batting 1,000 every single time I've had a parent-child relationship situation in my office, whether the child is 5 years old or 35 years old with the parent, so like a 70-year-old parent or a 60 whatever, that when I ask them, so I use imagery in my office. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of sand tray, but I'll ask people to pick images to tell me like what's going wrong in your relationship. Like, you're here for a reason, so how do you experience each other? And invariably, again, batting 1,000, the child will pick an image that shows this disparity of personhood. Like the parent is big and I'm small.
Wow.
Whether the child is 5 or 35. And then when I ask them, what is it that you would like to see the relationship like? They'll pick two things that have an eye-to-eye kind of, like whether it's two turkeys or two frogs or two, that we have this intrinsic thing. And even young kids will tell me, I don't want to take their authority. I don't want to be the parent. They just want to be seen as a human being.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you take a one down, you lose your intrinsic authority.
That's amazing. Wow. And that was an intrinsic authority. I love this language. It was modeled by Jesus perfectly.
Absolutely. Right.
And it's I look at so many leadership structures right now, and I think, man, this would be so helpful for folks to be able to step into leadership, because it's such a value for everyone around you. And Jesus revealed what it looks like, and it ultimately looks like a cross. Even, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. This authority you're describing.
Oh, it so chaps my hide and makes me want to cry all at the same time, that authority doesn't understand this. And it goes back to the thing, we disconnect our true self from the nature of Christ.
Yeah. Correct.
And the truest self of me is Christ in me, as Paul said, Christ is the hope of glory.
Yeah.
That, and you look at the way Christ operated with people, he never took a one down to anybody, and he, as the God of the universe in human form, never took a one up.
Yeah.
He didn't take a one up or one down. He leveled the playing field, right?
That's it. That's
so
it.
With Herod, with the Sadducees, with the Pharisees, even as a 12-year-old, he didn't take a one down.
Yes. That's amazing.
Right? And but he also didn't take a one up.
Yeah, that is so good.
He raises up the children and the lepers and the women and he brings down, like Herod, punches Pilate. I have the right to take your life. No, you don't.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
I'm standing for my own authority there, dude. You can't do this.
There's an intrinsic value, and there's an equality that is stunning in this type of authority, and it's humble, and it's honoring. The language I've used, but I think I'm going to be adopting some after this. But the language I've used often in leadership is, and I'll say this: I can come into any room and I can honor everyone in the room, because honor is the ability to see that diamond in everyone. That would be how I would say it to you. Honor is the ability to see the image of God in everyone. But trust is something that's earned, and it's earned over time or through extreme circumstances, and it can be lost in a minute. And I find these days that there are very few leaders that I have a hard time trusting, although I can certainly honor them. I have a hard time trusting, and I think that you just described, I'm able to see one aspect or two aspects or three aspects, but I'm not seeing that person that I can say, hey, here, step into the inner part of my heart and speak into that inner place. Like, you can fix my plumbing, but yeah, I'm probably not going to let you speak to my identity today.
Well, if they understand their own position from a one up, then you're stepping into a minefield, right?
Yeah.
I think that, to the degree that I can stand in the light, I can listen to somebody who even is taking a one up, and I can chew on the meat and spit out the bones.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm not
really
going to let you define my, what if it speaks truth, then I'll find
That's right.
truth. but I'm not going to give you a carte blanche. But I don't think we should give anybody a carte blanche. You know, even in an eye to eye, we're all full of crap and glory. We're all, you know, got mixed motives and stuff. And,
Sure.
And so, you know, and scripture tells us that. You know, I love the Jeremiah 17:5 passage, and it talks about cursed is the one who puts their trust in mere mortals, right? You'll be like a shrub in the desert. But blessed is the one who puts their trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord.
That's good.
My trust is the Lord. And so to the degree that you are operating in your diamond, I can trust that.
Yeah.
To the degree that you're in your crap and you're taking one up and you think I'm going to bow to you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
No.
That's beautiful.
Not going to do that. I can find the truth in, you know, amidst the crap that you're shoveling out.
Sure. That's right.
Right. I can, you know, wash it off in the light and go, okay, what's the nugget of truth? Yeah. I don't have to write you off, you know, wholeheartedly because of that.
Yeah. That's good.
Certainly, I'm not going to give you the right to define me or to direct my life.
Yeah, know? That's really good. And the flip side of that would, I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and they were, you know, we're in a season of outrage. Everybody's outraged. And they mentioned Jesus flipping tables. And I said, yeah, but he died for those same people. I'm like, you know, if you're going to flip the table, make sure you're ready to lay your life down for them.
Right. Exactly.
To me, that's the leader I'm looking for right now. I'm looking for the leader that. We are
so lacking leadership right now, and everywhere in every way. Just
wow.
And I so believe that if we don't start the conversations from the place of intrinsic authority, the place where we're all connected, we are just going to rip each other apart.
Yeah, that is so good.
Rohr talks about how if you start with how we're the same, now we can talk about our differences. But if you start with differences, you almost cannot get back to how we're the same.
Yeah,
that is good.
And so if the only way we are all the same is that diamond in us. And so if we start with that we have a shared humanity, now we can talk about the problems.
That's really good.
Yeah, that'll preach too.
Unfortunately, we're not preaching that. You know, it's like I wish I could shout it from the mountaintops.
Yeah.
Well, we're grateful because there are some that are. You know, we were talking about just before you got on. We have a pastor friend who's been listening to the podcast, and he said the other day, he said, "I found my people,
my tribe.
I found my tribe. That there are people that are running passionately down this road. We're so grateful for you. Honored to spend some time with you.
Yeah. Well, if you're ever up in the Northwest, or if I'm down there after COVID when we can actually
right. Do you have is your taco place open?
Oh yeah, they only do takeout right now.
Okay.
It's a real authentic you know, the real deal. It's not like some Taco Bell tacos. They're
sure. You can settle a dispute for us here.
Every time people are agreeing with you on this.
I win most of the time, so I like to ask, is it you do a soft shell or hard shell?
I do both, actually. Paradox, right?
There you go. Paradox. Exactly. I love that.
They have really good carnitas that are the soft, and then they have a really good crunchy shredded beef. They actually have this one called a potato taco.
Oh, yeah.
I only get once in a while because it feels like an indulgence, but that's always on a crunchy one. But so
right.
Are you the soft shell one?
Yeah, Thomas is the hard shell.
But yeah. I hate to admit that I am and I haven't even said this to Jason because his pride, I can't let his pride get bigger, but I am starting to come around to soft shell being good.
Paradox is great. I like Paradox. I'll have a taco that's crunchy once in a while. But.
So yeah.
So one of my dictums about staying out of all or nothing thinking is being willing to be convinced of the opposite. Right?
There you go.
So, Thomas, you need to be willing to be convinced, and Jason,
you're the bigger man. There's a lot of things I'm willing to be convinced of, but tacos and the Buffalo Bills, those are mine. Are you reading anything right now? Who are the greatest influences? Before we let you go, tell us Who's been influencing you recently?
Oh my gosh. Well, a path that I'm on right now is understanding the connection between our image of God in the brain and the working of the brain. It's actually something I've been on this path for a long time. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm reading right now is from Andrew Newberg and other people like him. His newest book that I'm taking this weekend when I go away to the coast is Principles of Neurotheology and understanding how the brain is wired for God. And so he's written some other books of why God won't go away. And
It's fantastic.
So, yeah.
Well, so just brain activity when people pray too. You know what? There's certain parts of the brain that are activated.
Andrew Newberg was one of the people that did a lot of the research on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's fascinating.
Well, and I told you about this earlier, but Kurt Thompson's work on the anatomy of the soul. He takes he's a Christian, he's a believer, but he tries to integrate all of what we know about attachment and neuroscience, and his work is really, really good. So
so that's one that's a lot of my reading is around, not just Andrew Newberg, but other brain people like Ian McGilchrist. He wrote a book called The Master and Its Emissary, and he did a TED Talk called The Divided Brain, and how we have this proclivity towards living in one or the other. I believe it's based on our judgments, and that's part of what I want to research and show, that our judgment inhibits the two sides of the brain. So the accepting paradox actually opens us up in bigger, to use more of our brain, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. Oh man, we need to have you back to talk about that. That's my stuff right there. I'm nerding out on that.
In his book, he says, I appreciate the way he puts it, because he doesn't put it as a matter of fact statement, like this is what this was created for. But he says that it appears that the corpus callosum's function is to inhibit the other side of the brain. And I believe that's not the way it's created, but that's the way it functions under our shame and our judgments. That it inhibits, because we have these different aspects of the brain holds different sides, and it's like this is right and that's wrong, that we're actually inhibiting our full use of the brain in that.
Yes, that's brilliant.
Well, and I'm sorry, I got to nerd out for a second, but the corpus callosum doesn't really formulate until you're 11 or 12 years old, according to Janina Fisher. So if there's trauma or damage, that doesn't even have the ability to fully actually connect. And so you have to put things in. That's why dissociation happens, right? You put things in a corner, and then you can't get left-right brain integration. The corpus callosum is the factor that's going to cause left and right brain integration. But if you have damage that occurs before the age of 11, it takes a lot of work for that to heal.
And I think it's more than just left, right. I think it's front, back, top, bottom, cerebellum.
Wow.
I think that it's the full brain. And I talk about these splits. I mean, when you understand the paradoxes of Christ, I think every paradox can be split, and it represents part of our personality. And so we then, once it's split, then our judgment kicks in and goes, this good or this good, which one's better,
right?
And then that's a judgment, instead of them holding together.
Wow. And I think this applies even to church cultures too, because you have certain spiritual places or churches that are so left brain and so heady that they leave no room for the heart. And then you have other spaces where we grow up that is so heart oriented that there's no way to have theological discussions without calling it, whatever. And so to be able to have a fully integrated church that is, like you said, top, bottom, but also left, right. I think there's a lot of wisdom there, I think, in having that conversation.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it's not just, it's a two-way flow. It's like some people might flow, like in one direction, but I think that it's both ways. Can I go this way and that way? Like from left to right and right to left. So it's not just a one direct, it's not unidirectional, it's bidirectional in all different ways. Almost like I use the metaphor of an atom, like it's holding all these pieces together in every direction, top, bottom, left, right, in every direction.
Is this and I know we're shooting off into an area I'm very unfamiliar with, but I love to hear you guys talk. Is there something to why we are so for and against?
Oh, I think it's absolutely that. Yeah. I mean, one of my dictums is behavior makes sense. I truly believe that behavior makes sense. Like no matter how wacky, crazy I believe you can tie it back to an attribute of Christ that's just gotten more and more distorted.
Wow.
And it's lost its paradox. Like I don't think there's a human trait that you can't trace back to the image of God. Wow. Because we can't create. All we can do is distort. Right. We can split paradoxes. I mean, in my follow-up book, it's the working title is Paradox Found. So the first one, Paradox Lost, is going to be Paradox Found. It's found in Christ. In one of the chapters, I talk about the first Adam, is ATOM. That atom, and we split the atom, and we create these problems. We create these damages by splitting the atom.
Wow. Yeah.
It's holding it back together that brings the healing and the freedom.
That is profound. I agree. I'm fascinated by the scientific approach and by the psychological approach you guys are so learned in. But I know just experientially that every broken place in my thinking is birthed from a lie I've believed about the nature of God, and therefore is worked into my life, and it comes out in my behavior. And I'm convinced that, and that's why we call this rethinking God. It's like, man, I get my heart around how big he is, how good he is, and tomorrow he's times two. It's better than that. Exactly. And that life and hope and true salvation is right there. Freedom is right there, and discovering the perfection of who he is.
Right. I mean, if your God isn't expanding, then you're stuck.
Yeah. Right. Oh my goodness. That's
there's only expansion or stuckness. Like if your God is bigger today than it was last month or last year, then that's a problem.
Amen. That is so good. I think that's what we'll be doing for eternity. Mm-hmm. Discovering I say it this way: you try and measure love by playing the game. I love you to the trees and back with your kids, and you give them a litany of love, and they say times two. And we love the game because you're trying to measure something that's measureless. Right. And that's the nature of God. We can't get our arms around the goodness of God.
Right. The last time my younger son was over, I don't get to see them that often these days, but he's my younger son is 26, and we used to read, Rabbit Moon, or something with I love the moon and back, right? And so that was I remember the title of it. So that's been like I gave him a hug and kissed him in his ear and said, "I love you to the moon and back." And he goes, "Is that all?" Is that all? Okay, man. More than back.
Yeah, times two, and then there's bigger numbers than that.
Katie, this has been so good. Thank you so much for coming on. Hey, where can people find your work if they wanna check your work out?
We have a website. You can find it in the full imagodeiministries.org, but then we found out that was so long and hard to spell, so we did ID for Imago Dei, and min for ministry, idmin.org.
Okay.
And, so there's lots of information on there, teaching some classes, and Imago Dei Ministries is part of a collective called Companion Center, and we are doing spiritual formation classes and trainings and things like that. So if you can find me also through the Companion Center.
Awesome. We'll put all that up online too, and let everybody know about where to find you. And man, and we'll also let you know when we release this. But we're so thankful.
That was fun, Jason and Thomas. That was really great.
Yeah.
Conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to doing it again, hopefully soon.
All right. Take care.
All right.
All right. Thanks.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode. We hope it encouraged. We had a lot of fun making it.
If you guys want to subscribe to this podcast, please do. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
all of them.
Anywhere you might listen to podcasts.
Leave a review. Yeah,
that'd be great.
Especially if it's a good review. We're just getting started, right?
We don't want bad reviews.
No. Also, if you want to follow us on social media, you can go to, I know this man has a Twitter account. We both do.
160 followers.
Nice.
It's very
It's
active.
about to skyrocket. And if you want to find us online, we're at afamilystory.org. Also, you can reach me there if you want to get a hold of us for any reason at jason@afamilystory.org.
We're excited that you guys are on this journey with us, and we look forward to releasing more content.
Yep. Thanks. See ya.